Karen attacked an officer and towed a cop car. He is now serving a life sentence. The tow truck's chain rattled against my driveway at 6 in the morning, and I knew right then my quiet life in Maple Ridge Estates was over. My name is Daniel Osei, and for 3 years I believed the Homeowners Association existed to protect us, not to destroy us. That morning, I watched a stranger's car get hooked up and dragged away from my own curb, and it wasn't a stranger's car at all. It was a Ridgeview police cruiser, parked there for 2 minutes while Officer Felix Marsh checked on a noise complaint next door. Karen Whitfield, HOA president of Maple Ridge, stood on her porch in a silk robe, arms crossed, smiling like she'd won a trophy. "Rules are rules," she said, loud enough for the whole cul-de-sac to hear, even for cops. I had no idea that single sentence would ignite a legal war that would end with Karen Whitfield in handcuffs and me holding the evidence that put her there. I moved to Maple Ridge Estates 2 years before all this, chasing the American dream of a quiet cul-de-sac and a decent school district for my daughter. I work as a civil engineer, the kind of guy who reads contracts twice and keeps receipts for everything, a habit that would later save my life. My neighbors were friendly enough back then, waving from their lawns, trading casserole recipes at the summer block party. Karen Whitfield had been HOA president for 6 years, re-elected every time because barely anyone bothered to vote against her. She ran the board like a small kingdom, with her husband Gary as treasurer and her sister-in-law Denise as secretary, a cozy little trio. At first, her rules seemed harmless: grass no taller than 4 inches, mailboxes painted a specific shade of navy, holiday lights down by January 5th. I didn't love the micromanaging, but I paid my dues and figured it was the price of a nice, orderly neighborhood. Little did I know Karen kept a private ledger of grudges, and my name had already landed on it after I questioned a reserve fund report at a meeting. The way most storms do, with a warning notice taped to my door about a garden gnome my daughter had painted. The notice cited a bylaw section that didn't even exist, but I paid the $10 fine anyway, not wanting trouble. 2 weeks later came a citation for my trash cans being visible from the street 11 minutes past the posted time window. Then a fine for my basketball hoop, installed for years, suddenly deemed an unauthorized structure under a rule Karen said she'd always enforced. I started noticing my citations arrive days after my neighbors committed the exact same violations and received nothing. My neighbor Priya mentioned Karen had been furious since I asked, at a meeting, why HOA dues jumped 15% with no itemized explanation. That was the moment I became a target, though I wouldn't fully understand how deep her vendetta ran for months. I began saving every notice, every email, every date and timestamp, in a folder I labeled simply HOA. That folder would grow into the very weapon that dismantled Karen's little kingdom. One Tuesday evening, Officer Felix Marsh knocked on my neighbor's door responding to a noise complaint about a barking dog. He parked his marked cruiser along the public curb in front of my driveway, engine running, lights off, completely legal. Karen burst out of her house before he'd even reached the neighbor's porch, phone already filming. "You can't park there, this is a private community, I don't care what badge you wear," she snapped at him. Felix calmly explained the curb was a public right-of-way and he'd be gone in 5 minutes. Karen didn't wait 5 minutes, she called a private towing company she happened to have on speed dial. When the tow truck arrived faster than any towing service should, hooking Felix's cruiser while he was still inside my neighbor's house. I stepped outside just as the chains clanked, my phone instinctively rising to record. Felix ran out mid-conversation, badge and radio in hand, shouting for the driver to stop. Karen stood between him and the truck, hands raised. "You don't own the road, officer. My community, my rules." Felix tried to step around her calmly. She grabbed his arm hard enough that he stumbled backward into the truck's bumper. "Ma'am, let go of me right now," he said, voice sharp, professional, but visibly rattled. She didn't let go. Instead she shoved him, both hands flat against his chest, and he fell onto the pavement. Gasps rippled down the street as 3 other neighbors stepped onto their porches, phones already out. I kept filming, hands shaking, heart pounding, because I knew, this was no longer about mailbox colors. The tow truck pulled away with the police cruiser hooked to its bed, lights flashing uselessly, siren silent. Felix radioed for backup, his voice cracking with disbelief as he described what had just happened. Karen turned to the small crowd and smiled, actually smiled, like she'd just won a neighborhood beautification award. When 2 squad cars arrived within 8 minutes, lights blazing across every front lawn on the block. Karen's smile vanished the instant she saw 4 officers step out, faces stone-cold serious. "You assaulted a police officer and interfered with law enforcement duties," the sergeant told her, reading directly from his notes. "I did no such thing. I run this community, ask anyone." Karen shrieked, gesturing wildly at the gathering crowd. Nobody backed her up. Not one neighbor spoke in her defense and several stepped forward holding up their phones. "I have it on video," I said, stepping closer, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. The sergeant asked me to send the footage directly to his department email before anyone left the scene. Karen's husband Gary came running out in socks, begging the officers to just let this go, she gets stressed easily. That excuse landed nowhere. The sergeant cuffed Karen's wrists and read her the assault charge on the spot. As they walked her to the squad car, she locked eyes with me and hissed, "You'll regret this, Daniel." I didn't know yet how true and how untrue those words would turn out to be. Felix, bruised but upright, thanked the neighbors for recording, especially me, and asked me to preserve the footage carefully. The tow truck, it turned out, was already 3 miles away, cruiser still hitched, driver unaware of the chaos behind him. A second unit chased it down and released the cruiser in a gas station parking lot, onlookers filming that too. By nightfall, the story had a name on local social media, the HOA Karen who towed a cop car. Settled over the cul-de-sac that night, an eerie quiet after Karen's arrest, everyone unsure what came next. I sat at my kitchen table, replaying the footage, sensing this was only the opening chapter of something much bigger. Karen posted bail by midnight, out within hours, already telling neighbors it was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. The HOA board, led by her sister-in-law Denise, released a statement calling the incident regrettable, but defending Karen's dedication to the community. I couldn't believe it, even after handcuffs, the machine protecting her hadn't slowed down at all. When Karen returned to her HOA president duties within a week, as if nothing happened. She called an emergency board meeting, framing herself as the victim of an aggressive off-duty officer harassing residents. I attended, notebook in hand, and watched her twist the story so smoothly that some longtime residents actually nodded along. That officer had no jurisdiction here, she insisted, ignoring the fact the street was legally public property. Denise seconded every claim Karen made, while Gary handled the projector, showing a blurry photo that supposedly proved the cruiser blocked a fire lane. I raised my hand and asked to see the actual HOA bylaw defining fire lane distances. Karen said that document was being updated. That vague dodge told me everything. There was no such bylaw, she was inventing rules on the spot, again. After the meeting, I noticed something odd, a new fine notice waiting on my windshield, dated the same day as the meeting. Filming HOA proceedings without written consent, $250 fine, it read, a rule I'd never once heard mentioned before. I realized Karen wasn't just deflecting the police case, she was quietly building a smear campaign against me specifically. Neighbors who'd filmed the towing incident started receiving their own mysterious fines within days. Priya got cited for a unauthorized satellite dish she'd had installed for 4 years without complaint. Another neighbor, Marcus, received a lien threat over supposedly unpaid dues he had receipts proving he'd paid in full. It became obvious, Karen was retaliating against every witness who could testify against her in the assault case. I started a shared document with the other targeted neighbors, cataloging every retaliatory fine, every suspicious date, every inconsistency. When Karen tried to have my dog impounded, claiming false reports of it attacking a passerby. Animal control arrived, found my elderly, arthritic golden retriever asleep on the porch and left immediately, embarrassed for even showing up. The officer quietly told me, off the record, that the complaint had come from Karen's own address, filed under a fake name. That was the crack I needed, proof she was fabricating complaints, not just enforcing overzealous rules. I filed a public records request for every HOA complaint submitted in the past year, using my legal right as a homeowner. The HOA's management company, surprisingly cooperative, sent me a spreadsheet within a week, full of names, dates, and IP addresses. Cross-referencing those IP addresses against the neighborhood's shared network map became my new nightly obsession. 14 resident complaints against me and my witness neighbors traced back to the exact same router, Karen's house. The night I discovered something buried deeper in those records, Karen wasn't even legally elected as president. A clerical filing from 3 years back showed the board had never certified her re-election. Her signature was forged onto the certification form. I stared at the document until midnight, hands trembling, realizing Karen had been running an illegitimate presidency the entire time. Every fine, every fee increase, every special assessment she'd approved could potentially be challenged as unauthorized. I didn't confront her yet, choosing instead to quietly consult a real estate attorney. Attorney Rosalind Chin reviewed my folder and went silent for a long moment before saying, "Daniel, this is much bigger than an HOA dispute." She explained that forged certification documents, combined with fraudulent fines, could constitute both fraud and misuse of association funds. I asked how long a case like this typically took. She said months, maybe longer, and Karen would fight dirty the entire way. I thought of Felix, still recovering from a shoulder injury from the fall, and decided I owed him more than silence. I reached out and offered to share everything: the forged documents, the fake complaints, the retaliation pattern. Felix's own attorney was building the assault case, and my evidence, it turned out, strengthened his claim of a documented pattern of abuse. When Karen, sensing something shifting, tried a new tactic: charm offensive turned smear campaign. She started a neighborhood newsletter painting Felix as a reckless off-duty cop who endangered a homeowner, and me as an outside agitator. Some neighbors, swayed by her polished tone, began avoiding eye contact with me at the mailbox. My daughter came home crying because a classmate's mom told her I was trying to ruin a nice lady's life. That hurt more than any fine ever could, but it also hardened my resolve to finish what I'd started. Karen escalated further, filing a restraining order against me, claiming I had stalked and harassed her by requesting public records. The judge at the preliminary hearing looked unimpressed, noting that public records requests are a legal right, not harassment. Still, the filing cost me a lawyer's fee and 2 stressful days away from work, exactly as Karen intended. I began to understand her strategy: bury me in paperwork and exhaustion until I gave up out of sheer fatigue. But every dirty move she made added another exhibit to the growing case file against her. Rosalind smiled grimly during our next meeting. "She's basically building your case for you at this point." Meanwhile, the criminal case against Karen for assaulting Officer Marsh moved to a formal arraignment. She pleaded not guilty, standing in a modest blazer instead of her usual designer wardrobe, playing the humble victim for the courtroom. Outside the courthouse, reporters from the local news station had picked up the story, cameras rolling. HOA president accused of assaulting officer over parked cruiser ran as the headline that evening. Karen gave a tearful interview claiming she'd feared for her safety from an aggressive, unidentified man near her home. I nearly threw my remote at the TV. Felix had been in full uniform, badge visible, radio crackling the entire time. When the local news obtained my footage through a public tip and aired it in full the next morning. The clip clearly showed Karen shoving Felix, the cruiser being towed, and her smug smile afterward. Public opinion flipped overnight, comment sections filled with outrage, and the HOA's Facebook page was flooded with 1-star reviews. Denise tried damage control, deleting comments, but screenshots spread faster than she could erase them. Karen's own longtime allies on the board started distancing themselves, one resigning, for personal reasons, within days. I received a call from an investigative journalist named Yara Petrosyan, wanting the full story, forged documents included. I weighed the decision: going public meant no turning back, no quiet resolution. Rosalind warned that publicity could pressure prosecutors, but also might provoke Karen into something reckless or dangerous. I thought about Felix's shoulder, Priya's fake satellite fine, my daughter's tears, and decided silence had already cost enough. I agreed to the interview, bringing copies of the forged certification and the fabricated complaint spreadsheet. The night before it aired, an anonymous message arrived on my phone: "Back off or you'll lose more than you think." I forwarded it straight to Rosalind and the detective handling Karen's assault case, my hands cold with adrenaline. Detective Ruiz traced the number within 2 days, registered to a burner phone purchased at a gas station Karen frequented weekly. That single thread connected her directly to witness intimidation, a new and far more serious charge. Karen was arrested a second time, this time for intimidating a witness in an active criminal proceeding. Her bail conditions tightened, including a no-contact order against me, Felix, Priya and Marcus. The HOA board, now down to just Gary and one remaining loyalist, scrambled to hold an emergency vote. Residents, furious and finally paying attention, showed up in numbers no meeting had seen in years. A motion to remove Karen from the presidency passed with an overwhelming majority, Gary abstaining in stunned silence. But removal from a volunteer board was nothing compared to what the court still had waiting for her. The forged certification document became central evidence in a separate civil fraud complaint filed by the new interim board. The morning of Karen's combined pretrial hearing for assault, intimidation, and fraud. The courthouse steps were lined with reporters, former neighbors, and even Felix, arms still in a light sling. Karen arrived without her usual entourage. Gary had filed for divorce 2 weeks prior, citing irreconcilable circumstances. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution laid out the timeline: assault, retaliation, forged documents, and witness intimidation, piece by piece. Rosalind, representing the affected residents in a related civil suit, presented the spreadsheet linking fake complaints to Karen's home IP. Karen's attorney tried to argue the IP evidence was circumstantial, but the judge overruled the objection, letting it stand. Then came the moment nobody, including me, saw coming. Denise took the stand as a surprise witness for the prosecution. Facing her own potential charges for helping falsify board minutes, Denise had struck a deal to testify against Karen. She told me exactly which words to change in the meeting records, Denise said, voice shaking, avoiding Karen's furious glare. Denise revealed Karen had altered official minutes to erase any mention of the missing 2021 election certification. Gasps spread through the gallery. Karen's face went pale, all composure finally cracking under the courtroom lights. The judge asked Denise directly whether Karen instructed her to file the fake noise complaint against my dog. Yes, Denise answered. She used my laptop because she said her own IP would look suspicious. That admission connected every retaliatory fine, every fake complaint, directly and undeniably back to Karen herself. Felix testified next, describing the shove, the fall, the pain in his shoulder that still ached during storms. I was doing my job. She decided her parking rules mattered more than a badge, he told the jury quietly. The towing company owner also testified, admitting Karen had a special rate agreement for towing any vehicle she personally flagged. Began as the prosecutor called their final witness, a forensic accountant reviewing HOA finances. The accountant revealed nearly $40,000 in special assessments collected under Karen's forged authority had never been accounted for. Some of that money, traced through bank records, had funded a private security camera system aimed directly at my driveway. Karen had been surveilling me the entire time, documenting my movements to build a harassment case against me instead. That surveillance footage, subpoenaed by the prosecution, backfired spectacularly, capturing her own late-night meetings with the towing company owner. One clip showed her handing him a folded envelope of cash the same week Felix's cruiser was towed. The prosecutor asked the towing owner directly what was in the envelope. He answered plainly, a bonus for a fast job. Bribery. Premeditation. The towing hadn't been a spontaneous rule enforcement, it had been planned in advance. Karen's attorney requested a recess, clearly scrambling, but the judge denied it, letting the momentum carry forward. On cross-examination, Karen finally took the stand herself, insisting everything was misunderstood, exaggerated, twisted by angry neighbors. The prosecutor calmly pulled up her own text messages, subpoenaed weeks earlier, projected onto the courtroom screen. Tow the cop car the second he steps inside, I'll handle the paperwork after. One message read, timestamped minutes before the incident. Karen's face drained of color as the jury read her own words, planned and deliberate, nothing like the misunderstanding she'd claimed. Another message to Denise read, file the dog complaint under your name, mine can't show up again this month. The courtroom fell utterly silent except for the click of the court reporter's keyboard capturing every damning line. Karen's attorney tried one last defense, diminished capacity, claiming she'd been under extreme stress from board responsibilities. The prosecutor simply replied, "Stress doesn't forge signatures. Stress doesn't bribe tow drivers. Malice does." The jury deliberated for 6 hours, though most observers agreed the verdict felt certain within the first 30 minutes. I sat beside Felix in the gallery, both of us silent, neither quite believing we'd reached. When the jury returned, the forewoman read each charge slowly: assault on an officer, guilty; witness intimidation, guilty; fraud regarding HOA funds, guilty; falsifying official records, guilty; bribery of a private contractor, guilty. Karen sat motionless, staring at the table, as 5 separate guilty verdicts landed one after another like falling dominoes. Somewhere behind me, a former neighbor whispered, "I can't believe we voted for her 4 times." The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later, revoking Karen's bail immediately given the witness intimidation conviction. Bailiffs led her out in handcuffs a second time, this time with no smug smile, no defiant remark toward me. Gary, watching from the back row, didn't move to comfort her, he simply looked down at his own hands. Outside, reporters swarmed, but I found myself more interested in checking on Felix than answering a single camera. "You okay?" I asked him. He nodded slowly. First time in 11 years I've felt like the system actually worked. Settled over Maple Ridge Estates in the weeks that followed, the community forever changed by what had surfaced. The interim board voided every forged assessment, refunding overcharged dues to residents, myself included. Priya's satellite fine was dismissed, Marcus's lien thread erased, and both received formal written apologies from the association. My daughter's classmate's mother, embarrassed, actually apologized for repeating Karen's version of events without question. Felix returned to full duty after physical therapy, though his shoulders still ached whenever the weather turned cold. He and I became genuine friends, an unlikely bond forged by a towed cruiser and a folder of stubborn evidence. The HOA itself faced a state audit, prompted by the fraud conviction, revealing sloppy oversight that let one person hoard so much power. New bylaws passed requiring independent audits, term limits, and mandatory public access to all complaint records. Sentencing day arrived on a gray Tuesday, the courtroom fuller than I expected for what should have been a routine hearing. The judge addressed Karen directly. "You didn't just break rules, Ms. Whitfield. You weaponized a position of trust against your own neighbors." The judge handed down consecutive sentences: assault, intimidation, fraud, forgery, bribery, each stacking atop the last. Given her lack of remorse and the deliberate, calculated nature of every act, the judge imposed the maximum on each count, running consecutively. The total came to a sentence that would keep Karen behind bars for the remainder of her natural life. She showed no reaction at first, then finally, quietly, began to cry, the sound echoing oddly in the hushed courtroom. Gary filed the final divorce papers that same week, requesting sole ownership of the house, uncontested. I watched the moving truck arrive months later, taking away the last physical trace of the Whitfield name from Maple Ridge. Denise, spared prison through her cooperation, received probation and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board. She moved out of state quietly, leaving behind an empty house and a neighborhood still healing from her silence. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant so much as tired, the exhausted relief of finally setting down a heavy weight. My daughter asked if the mean lady was gone for good. I told her yes, and that doing the right thing, even slowly, still counts. Felix stopped by one evening, off duty, just to share a beer on my porch. No cruiser, no chains, no chaos. "You kept every receipt, every email, every date," he said. "That patience is what actually put her away." I told him the truth. I never set out to be anyone's hero, I just refused to let unfairness go undocumented. The tow truck driver, it turned out, cooperated fully once charged as an accessory, receiving a reduced sentence for his testimony. The towing company itself lost its municipal contract permanently after the bribery revelations became public record. Maple Ridge Estates elected a new HOA president that fall, Priya, running on a single promise: transparency above all else. Under her leadership, meetings were live-streamed, minutes published within 24 hours and complaints logged with names attached. I still keep my HOA folder, thicker now than ever, a strange trophy from the year I refused to back down. Sometimes late at night I think about how close Karen came to breaking me with fines, threats and fabricated fear. But every forged document, every bribed favor, every intimidated witness eventually became the very evidence that buried her. Justice didn't arrive quickly or cleanly, it arrived exhausted, expensive and hard-won, exactly the way real justice usually does. Karen Whitfield now sits in a state correctional facility, her name a cautionary tale whispered at HOA meetings across the county. Local news ran a follow-up piece a year later titled, "How One Towed Cop Car Exposed a Decade of HOA Corruption." Yara's original interview footage became part of a journalism course on investigative reporting, studied by students who'd never met any of us. Felix was awarded a commendation for his composure that night, though he insists the real credit belongs to a stubborn neighbor with a phone. I don't think of myself as brave. I think of myself as someone who simply refused to delete the video. The cul-de-sac looks different now, no forced Navy mailboxes, no gnome citations, no shadow of a woman who ruled through fear. On quiet evenings, kids play basketball in driveways again, hoops unremoved, laughter unregulated, rules finally reasonable. My daughter painted a new garden gnome last spring, nobody taped a notice to our door. I still see Priya at the mailbox some mornings and we laugh, quietly, about how far we've come from that first $10 fine. Marcus rebuilt his credit after the false lien was expunged, something Karen never once apologized for, not even at sentencing. Gary sold the house and moved across the state, reportedly telling a coworker he never fully understood how deep it went. Denise sends Priya a card every holiday season, an odd, quiet gesture from a woman rebuilding a smaller, humbler life. The forensic accountant's report became a template other HOAs now use nationwide to prevent similar hidden fund abuses. Rosalind, my attorney, still calls occasionally, joking that our case remains the strangest and most satisfying of her career. Detective Ruiz retired last year, listing the Whitfield case among the 3 most memorable of his decades on the force. I think about the moment Karen smiled at that tow truck, so certain her power was untouchable, absolute, permanent. She never imagined a quiet engineer with a habit of saving receipts would become the reason it all unraveled. Power built on fear and forged signatures always feels solid, right up until someone refuses to stop asking questions. Felix still drives past Maple Ridge occasionally, waving if he sees me in the yard, no cruiser needed this time. The towing company's old lot sits empty now, its municipal contract gone, its name quietly erased from public records. Sometimes new residents ask about the strange history of the neighborhood, the older ones simply say, "Ask about the Karen who towed a cop car." It became local legend, retold at barbecues, half joke and half warning about unchecked power in small places. I learned that justice rarely looks like a single dramatic moment, it looks like months of patient documentation finally paying off. Karen's appeal was denied 18 months later, the appellate court calling the evidence overwhelming and irrefutable. She remains behind bars today, her name a footnote in a courthouse file thick with forged signatures and broken trust. Maple Ridge Estates thrives now, ordinary and unremarkable, exactly the kind of quiet life I'd originally moved here for. The cost was real: stress, fear, a strained year, a daughter who saw more conflict than any child should, but so was the justice. Some evenings I still glance at that curb where the cruiser once sat and I feel, finally, at peace.